Welcome back, and if you're just getting in the door, we have a recap of some of the local stories you may have missed. From the station Putting Local First, 3 people have died, including 2 children, after devastating flooding ripped through the village of Ruidoso on Monday. Officials saying 3 people were transported to a Texas hospital and are all in stable condition tonight. 1 person remains missing, while every other missing person has since been located. 65 swiftwater rescues were performed in the floodwaters. 20 people have been displaced by the flooding, and assessing the damage will take several days. And the 2 children, ages 4 and 7, who died as a result of the flash flood are the children of a Fort Bliss soldier. Military officials telling KTSM a Fort Bliss soldier and their spouse sustaining serious injuries in the floods, while their 2 children died. Fort Bliss says the family was caught in the flash flood while on approved leave at an RV vehicle campground near Ruidoso. Fort Bliss is not releasing the names of the soldier and their family out of the respect for the family's privacy. The man who died in the flooding has yet to be identified. In New Mexico, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has signed an emergency declaration asking for federal assistance following this latest round of flooding in Ruidoso. The governor says New Mexico is mobilizing every resource, but says Ruidoso needs federal support to recover from the disaster. The declaration is a request to get federal response teams to Ruidoso as quickly as possible. The governor will be visiting Ruidoso tomorrow morning at an emergency operations center. And joining us now is the public information officer for the village of Ruidoso, Kerry Gladden. Kerry, first of all, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know the mayor of Ruidoso, Lynn Crawford, actually meeting with the governor as we speak right now. Just a tragic situation that is playing out in your community. And you guys have just been through so much within the last year, whether it be the wildfires, last year's flooding, and now you get the flooding again this year. Just how is everybody holding up in your community right now?
You know, everybody is holding up. We're coming together like we always do. We're a very resilient community, and unfortunately, we've had to do this a few times over the years. And so, you know, we come together, we see the work that needs to be done, and we get to work.
To the best of your knowledge, what was the timeline of events leading up to some of this flash flooding that we saw? And at what point did you think that this was going to be as bad as it got?
It was about a little before 2 o'clock yesterday when it started raining high up in the Upper Canyon. And we were in the Emergency Operations Center, and we were watching a USGS camera that is up at the top of the Upper Canyon. And we always watch to see, you know, when the waters, when the headwaters basically get there. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, that's bigger than anything we've seen even last year. And so at that point it was moved from a watch to a warning, and then within the next 30 minutes it was moved from a warning to a flash flood emergency. And so that all took place from a little before 2 until about 3 o'clock when the emergency was declared.
We saw 65 swiftwater rescues that were, I'm sure, very, very challenging. But what were the biggest challenges that some of these first responders were facing trying to reach residents and get them to safety?
I think it's important to note when answering a question like that, to understand that how big the water was yesterday. It was a historical high water mark when it crested at the USGS river gauge that's between Ruidoso and Ruidoso Downs. It crested at 20 feet, and that set a high water mark over the historical mark that was set last year when it crested at 15 feet. So what they were fighting against was just an enormous amount of water, an enormous amount of debris, and then, you know, trying to get to people who were in trees, in cars, in their homes, and get them extracted safely.
Yeah, just in the speed that happened too. It took less than 2 hours to get to that 20-foot mark.
Right.
We saw all the images, but can you describe maybe just the scope of the destruction and damage that we've seen, and maybe some of the areas that were hardest hit?
Sure. The Upper Canyon, Paradise Canyon, Brady Canyon, and Cedar Creek were the hit very hard upstream, and then as it all came down, then you saw different low water crossings that have bridges through town that took a beating, but they all stayed in place. And then of course, once the water got to Ruidoso Downs and crossed over on to the racetrack property and just did all the damage to the racetrack, and then the neighborhoods beyond that when it breached the track property. So it is pretty amazing when you look at the damage that water can do in that short amount of time.
Kerry, we hear a lot about the burn scars that were left over from the wildfires contributing to a lot of this flooding, largely contributing to a lot of this flooding. Is there anything that anyone can do to prevent this from happening, since you know that that's a big source of why it's happening?
Sure. There's some mitigation that can be done in the form of trash racks and reseeding and dropping of the burned trees to, provide some barriers between where the water falls and where it comes down the canyons. But the gist of it is that when you have a fire like the fires that we had, the soil becomes hydrophobic, and so it's basically like when water falls on it, it's like water falling on concrete. It doesn't soak in, there's no vegetation for it to grab onto, and so it just runs as if you were pouring onto concrete or pavement. And so until you can get some of that back in place, whether it's actual vegetation or things like trash racks and HESCO bags and stuff like that, it's just something that it's a reality of having to deal with living in a burn scar.
Kerry Gladden, thank you so much for taking the time with us here today. Certainly our thoughts are with you through all of this. Rebuilding again, I know that Ruidoso will plan to come back even stronger, and certainly wish you and all the residents in Ruidoso the very best as you kind of navigate the next steps. Thank you for your time here tonight.
Thank you guys for being such great neighbors.
Yeah, thank you. Kerry, thank you. And we mentioned the catastrophic flooding that we also have seen in Central Texas over the